At 30,000 feet on a routine flight, Marcus Wellington hears a laugh he's tried to forget and freezes. Across the aisle, his ex-wife, Sarah, with a baby in her arms. One unexpected reunion will rip open the neat story he tells about their divorce and force him to choose between pride and the truth. What begins in seat 14A will rewrite what he believes about love, betrayal, and second chances, and transform two guarded hearts forever. The private jet's leather seats gleamed under soft cabin lighting as Marcus Wellington settled into seat 2A, his perfectly tailored Armani suit a stark contrast to the casual travelers around him. At 42, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had built an empire from nothing, but today something felt different. The familiar weight of his platinum wedding ring, the one he'd never quite managed to remove even 2 years after the divorce, pressed against his finger like a guilty conscience. Marcus had learned to read people the way others read stock reports. It was survival in his world. But as he reached for his laptop, preparing for another soul-crushing merger review, a familiar laugh floated through the cabin air. His blood froze. That laugh had once been his favorite sound in the world, the one that could make him forget about hostile takeovers and board meetings. The one he hadn't heard in over 2 years. Sarah. He turned slowly, his businessman's composure cracking like ice under pressure. 3 rows behind him, settling into an aisle seat with practiced efficiency, was Sarah Chen Wellington. Well, Sarah Chen now, he supposed. Her dark hair was shorter than he remembered, framing her face in soft waves that made her look younger, more vibrant somehow. She wore a simple blue dress that he recognized. He'd bought it for her during their 2nd anniversary trip to Paris, back when they still believed in forever. But it wasn't Sarah's presence that made Marcus's chest tighten until breathing became a conscious effort. It was the baby in her arms. The infant couldn't be more than 8 months old, with a shock of dark hair that stuck up at impossible angles. Even from this distance, Marcus could see the child's features clearly, and what he saw made his world tilt off its axis. The baby had his eyes, not just the color, but the exact shape, the way they crinkled slightly at the corners, even in sleep. The chin was unmistakably his, with that stubborn little cleft that his father had passed down to him and his grandfather before that. Marcus's hands trembled as he reached for his water glass, the simple action suddenly requiring enormous concentration. The baby shifted in Sarah's arms, and Marcus caught a glimpse of tiny fingers wrapped around Sarah's thumb. Those fingers. He knew those fingers. He saw them every morning in the mirror, in old family photos, in his reflection when he made decisions that changed lives and moved markets. "Sir? Sir? Are you all right?" The flight attendant's voice seemed to come from underwater. Marcus realized he'd been staring, his successful businessman facade completely abandoned. Other passengers were beginning to notice, their curious glances adding to the pressure building in his chest. "Fine," he managed, his voice rougher than usual. "Just recognize someone." The attendant smiled politely and moved on, but Marcus remained frozen, his mind racing through calculations that had nothing to do with profit margins. 8 months old. That would put conception right around. His stomach dropped as he counted backward, right around their last night together, before everything fell apart. Before the final fight that ended with Sarah walking out of their penthouse, her wedding ring left on the kitchen counter like a period at the end of a sentence he'd never wanted to finish. Sarah was laughing softly at something the passenger next to her had said, her attention completely focused on the baby who was now awake and making soft cooing sounds that somehow carried through the cabin's white noise. She looked happy, genuinely happy in a way Marcus hadn't seen in the final months of their marriage, when every conversation had become a minefield and every silence felt like an accusation. The baby turned slightly, and Marcus's breath caught again. The child was looking directly at him with curious eyes that mirrored his own, as if sensing some invisible connection across the cabin. For a moment that stretched like eternity, Marcus felt as though he was looking at himself 42 years in the past, wrapped in someone else's love and unaware of the complicated world waiting ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Chicago O'Hare, The captain's voice crackled through the intercom, jolting Marcus back to reality. Local time is 3:47 p.m. and the weather is partly cloudy with a temperature of 72 degrees. Chicago. Of course it was Chicago. The city where he'd first met Sarah at a charity gala 6 years ago, where she'd been volunteering with underprivileged kids while he'd been there purely for networking purposes. She'd been wearing a red dress that night, her hair in an elegant updo, and when she'd laughed at his awkward joke about municipal bonds, he'd known his carefully ordered life was about to become beautifully complicated. Marcus pulled out his phone with shaking fingers, scrolling through his contacts until he found Dr. Jennifer Martinez, his therapist. The woman who'd helped him through the darkest days after the divorce, when success felt hollow and his penthouse felt like a mausoleum of broken promises. He typed and deleted a dozen messages, unable to find words for the impossible situation unfolding around him. The baby had started fussing, tiny cries that seemed to pierce directly through Marcus's chest. Sarah was rocking gently, whispering soft words in Mandarin, lullabies her grandmother had sung to her, the same ones she used to hum when she thought Marcus was asleep. He'd pretended not to understand, but he'd secretly learned the words, treasuring the glimpse into the part of Sarah's heart she kept protected from the world. "Shh, little one," Sarah murmured, switching to English. "We're almost there. Daddy's waiting for us." The word daddy hit Marcus like a physical blow. Daddy. Someone else was this. Child's daddy. Someone else got to experience the miracle of those tiny fingers, those impossible eyes, that perfect combination of features that screamed Wellington family genetics. But who? In all his business connections and careful monitoring of Sarah's public life, not stalking, he told himself, just staying informed. He'd never heard mention of a serious relationship, let alone a father. Marcus found himself studying every male passenger on the plane, searching for someone who might be traveling with Sarah, someone who might have the right to claim that beautiful child as their own. But Sarah seemed to be traveling alone, just her and the baby, and a well-worn diaper bag that looked nothing like the designer luggage she'd preferred during their marriage. The plane banked slightly, and Marcus caught a clearer view of Sarah's profile. She looked tired, he realized, not just the normal exhaustion of traveling with an infant, but something deeper. There were shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't completely hide, and her smile, while genuine, seemed to require effort. The successful art gallery owner who'd matched his ambition with her own creative vision had been replaced by someone softer, more vulnerable, but somehow stronger too. As the plane continued its descent, Marcus made a decision that went against every business instinct he'd honed over 2 decades. He was going to approach her. He was going to find out the truth about this child who shared his features, about this new version of Sarah who traveled alone with a baby, about why she'd never mentioned being pregnant in any of their brief, awkward post-divorce conversations about dividing assets. But first, he needed to understand what he was walking into. Marcus pulled out his tablet and began scrolling through social media, searching for any trace of Sarah's life over the past year. Her Instagram account, once filled with gallery openings and weekend adventures, had gone private. Her LinkedIn showed she'd taken a leave of absence from Chen Gallery 8 months ago, right around the time this baby would have been born. 8 months. The timeline kept coming back to haunt him, like a mathematical proof he couldn't refute. He remembered their last night together with painful clarity, the fight about starting a family that had escalated into accusations about priorities and love, and what mattered most. Sarah had wanted children. Marcus had wanted to wait until the business was more stable, until they'd figured out how to balance their careers with parenthood. "There's always going to be another deal," she'd said, tears streaming down her face. "Another opportunity that's more important than us." He'd been wrong. God, he'd been so spectacularly wrong about what mattered. The flight attendant was making final preparations for landing, and Marcus realized he was running out of time to figure out his approach. Did he pretend not to notice Sarah? Did he walk up casually and act surprised? Did he demand answers about the child who might be his son or daughter? The baby had calmed down and was now looking around the cabin with alert intelligence, those familiar eyes taking in everything with the curiosity Marcus recognized from his own childhood photos. When the infant's gaze landed on him again, Marcus felt something fundamental shift in his chest. This wasn't just about Sarah anymore, or their failed marriage, or his wounded pride. This was about a tiny person who might be his child, who might have spent the first 8 months of life not knowing their father existed. "Prepare for landing," came the announcement, and Marcus realized he was gripping his armrest so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Around him, passengers were gathering their belongings, returning seats to upright positions, preparing for the transition from suspended reality to whatever waited on the ground. But Marcus felt like he was falling without a parachute, hurtling toward a truth that would either destroy him completely or give him a second chance he didn't deserve. Sarah was gathering her things with the efficient movements of a new mother, everything organized and purposeful. She'd always been good at that, making order from chaos, finding beauty in the mundane details that Marcus's business mind overlooked. The diaper bag was packed with military precision, bottles and perp cloths and tiny socks arranged in a way that spoke of practice and necessity, rather than the romantic ideals they'd once discussed during lazy Sunday conversations about hypothetical futures. The wheels touched down with a gentle bump, and Marcus felt the engine's reverse thrust, slowing their forward momentum while his thoughts accelerated in the opposite direction. He had perhaps 15 minutes before passengers began deplaning, 15 minutes to decide whether to change the course of multiple lives or walk away and pretend this impossible coincidence had never happened. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. "Car waiting at gate B7. Merger documents ready for review. Board meeting confirmed for 6 p.m. The real world was calling, demanding his attention, reminding him of the carefully structured life he'd built from the ashes of his divorce. A life where he controlled variables, minimized risks, and never left anything to chance. A life that had no room for the kind of earth-shattering revelation that was currently sleeping peacefully 3 rows behind him. But as the plane taxied toward the gate, Marcus found himself studying the reflection in his window. 42 years old, successful beyond his wildest childhood dreams, respected in his industry, financially secure enough to weather any storm, and utterly alone in a way that success couldn't fix and money couldn't heal. The baby made a soft sound, and Sarah's voice responded with gentle reassurance. "Almost there, sweetheart, just a little longer." Marcus closed his eyes, remembering the conversations they'd had about baby names, about nursery colors, about all the small dreams that had gotten lost in the larger ambitions. If this child was his, and every instinct he possessed was screaming that it was, then Sarah had experienced pregnancy, birth, and 8 months of parenthood completely alone. The thought made him physically ill. Sarah, who'd been terrified of labor, who'd made him promise to never leave her side if they had children, had gone through it all without him. She'd made middle-of-the-night feedings, first smiles, and countless small miracles into private memories that didn't include him. If he was this child's father, then he'd missed everything that mattered. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Chicago," the captain announced as they pulled up to the gate. "Local time is 4:15 p.m. Thank you for flying with us." Today, Marcus remained seated as passengers began standing, gathering overhead luggage, preparing to return to their lives. He watched Sarah carefully lift the baby, supporting the small head with practiced ease, whispering something that made the infant smile. That smile, crooked on the left side just like Marcus's, just like his father's before him, was the final piece of evidence he needed. This was his child, his son or daughter, perfect and innocent, and completely unaware that their entire existence had just turned their father's world upside down. Sarah was waiting for the aisle to clear, patient in the way new mothers learn to be, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders. She was preparing for something, steeling herself for whatever waited beyond the gate. Chicago wasn't just a destination for her, it was a homecoming, a return to the city where their love story had begun and ended. Marcus made his decision. As the passengers ahead of him moved toward the exit, he stood and smoothly stepped into the aisle, positioning himself naturally in the flow of departing travelers. His heart was pounding so hard, he was sure other passengers could hear it, but his business training kicked in, helping him project the calm confidence that had gotten him through hostile takeovers and billion-dollar negotiations. When Sarah looked up and their eyes met for the first time in 2 years, Marcus saw her face go through a series of expressions: surprise, recognition, something that might have been fear, and finally a careful neutrality that broke his heart. "Marcus," she said quietly, her voice carrying the same mixture of warmth and wariness that had characterized their last few conversations before the divorce. "Sarah." He kept his voice level, professional, as if running into his ex-wife on a plane was the most natural thing in the world. "What a coincidence." She shifted the baby slightly, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed. "Yes, quite a coincidence." The baby chose that moment to look directly at Marcus, and he saw Sarah notice the resemblance in real time. Her face went pale, then flushed, and he could practically see her mind working through implications and timelines and all the complications that were about to explode into both their lives. "This is," she started, then stopped, clearly struggling with what to say. "A beautiful baby," Marcus finished, his throat tight. "Boy or girl?" "Boy." The word came out as barely more than a whisper. "His name is David." David. Marcus felt like he'd been punched in the chest. David had been his father's name, the grandfather this little boy would never know because Marcus's father had died 5 years ago, still disappointed that his only son had chosen business over family, money over meaning. Sarah knew how much that name meant to him, how much guilt Marcus carried about his father dying before they'd reconciled their differences. "David's a strong name," Marcus managed, wondering if Sarah could hear the emotion he was fighting to keep contained. The line of passengers was moving forward, and they were being pressed together by the crowd, close enough that Marcus could smell the soft baby scent mixed with Sarah's familiar perfume. Close enough to see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she held herself like someone who'd been strong for so long that strength had become a burden. "How old is he?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. 8 months. Sarah's voice was steady, but her hands were trembling slightly where they supported the baby. "Born in November." November. Marcus did the math automatically, the way he'd been doing since first seeing them on the plane. Conceived in February or March, right around the time of their final fight, their last desperate attempt to save a marriage that had been drowning in miscommunication and misplaced priorities. They reached the gate exit, and Marcus realized they were about to be separated by the reality of ground transportation, different destinations, lives that had diverged 2 years ago. He had seconds to decide whether to let this moment pass or to demand the conversation that would change everything. "Sarah," he said, his voice carrying more urgency than he'd intended. "We need to talk." She paused in the doorway of the plane, passengers flowing around them like water, around stones. David was alert in her arms, looking between his mother and Marcus with the serious expression of a child who sensed adult emotions beyond his understanding. "I don't think that's a good idea," Sarah said finally. "Please." The word came out rougher than Marcus had intended, stripped of the polished confidence that had made him millions. I think I have a right to know." For a moment, Sarah's careful composure cracked, and Marcus saw the woman he'd fallen in love with, vulnerable, fierce, protective of the things that mattered most. "Rights," she said quietly. "You gave up your rights when you chose your career over our family. When you made it clear that having children would be an inconvenience to your 5-year plan." The words hit like physical blows, accurate and devastating. Marcus wanted to argue, to explain that he'd thought he was being responsible, practical, ensuring they'd be financially stable before taking on the responsibility of parenthood. But standing here looking at the child who might be his son, he realized how hollow those justifications sounded. "I was wrong," he said simply. "About everything. About what mattered. About us. About priorities." He paused, watching David's tiny fingers curl around Sarah's thumb. "But if he's mine? If?" Sarah's voice rose slightly, causing David to fuss. She immediately began the gentle rocking motion that seemed instinctive to new mothers. Her voice, dropping back to a whisper. "If, Marcus, look at him, really look at him." Marcus did. He studied the small face, the familiar features, the way David's eyes tracked movement with intelligence that reminded him of his own childhood intensity. The resemblance was undeniable, written in every line and angle and expression. This was his son, his child. The family he'd wanted but had been too afraid to reach for when it mattered. "He's mine," Marcus said, not a question but a statement of fact that seemed to echo through the gate area. "Biologically, yes." Sarah's voice was steady, but Marcus could see the tears she was fighting. "In every other way that matters, no, Marcus. You weren't there. You weren't there when I found out I was pregnant, or when I was sick every morning for 3 months, or when I went to doctor's appointments alone. You weren't there when I went into labor, or when David took his first breath, or for any of the nights when he had colic and wouldn't stop crying." Each word was a nail driven into Marcus's chest, a catalogue of moments he'd lost, memories that belonged to someone else or no one at all. He'd spent the 8 months of David's life closing deals and expanding market share, while his son was learning to smile, to roll over, to trust the world around him. "I didn't know," Marcus said weakly, "because I didn't tell you." Sarah's admission carried the weight of 8 months of decisions, of choosing to protect her child from uncertainty, and her own heart from the possibility of more rejection. "Because the last thing you said to me was that having children would ruin everything we'd worked for. Because you made it clear that our marriage wasn't strong enough to handle the complications of a family." Around them, the gate area was returning to normal operations, boarding announcements for other flights, travelers heading toward baggage claim and ground transportation. But Marcus felt suspended. In this conversation, in this moment where the past and present and future were colliding with devastating force. "What do you want from me, Sarah?" Marcus asked, his voice barely audible. "An apology? Child support? Shared custody arrangements?" Sarah looked at him for a long moment, and Marcus saw something shift in her expression. The defensive walls she'd built were still there, but behind them he glimpsed the woman who'd once believed in their future together, who'd dreamed of Sunday mornings and family vacations, and all the small domestic moments that success couldn't buy. "I want," she started, then stopped, clearly struggling with emotions that threatened to overwhelm her careful control. "I want you to understand that David isn't a complication or a problem to be solved. He's not a merger to be negotiated, or a deal to be structured. He's a little boy who needs stability and love, and parents who put his needs before their own ambitions. I can do that," Marcus said immediately. "I want to do that." "Can you?" Sarah's question carried the weight of their entire failed marriage. "Can you really, Marcus? Because wanting something and being capable of it are two different things. David doesn't need a part-time father who shows up when it's convenient and disappears when business calls. He needs someone who will be there for scraped knees and homework help and teenage heartbreak and all the messy, inconvenient, wonderful parts of raising a child." Marcus wanted to promise her everything, to swear that he'd changed, that becoming a father had somehow transformed him into the man she'd needed him to be during their marriage. But the words felt hollow before he'd even spoken them. How could he prove that he'd learned to value the right things when his first instinct had been to think about custody arrangements and legal rights, rather than simply asking about his son's favorite toy or whether he was sleeping through the night? David had been watching this exchange with the alert attention of a child who understood more than he could express. Now he reached out a tiny hand toward Marcus, fingers opening and closing in the universal baby gesture for "pick me up." The simple action hit Marcus like a lightning bolt, his son reaching for him, trusting in the way that only children could trust. "May I?" Marcus asked, his voice rough with emotion. Sarah hesitated, and Marcus could see the war being fought behind her eyes. Protective mother versus the woman who'd once loved him. Practical considerations versus the hope that maybe, somehow, they could find a way to give David the family he deserved. Finally, carefully, she transferred the baby into Marcus's arms. David was heavier than Marcus had expected, solid and real and warm in a way that made every business achievement in his life pale by comparison. The baby looked up at him with curious eyes, and Marcus felt something fundamental shift in his chest, tectonic plates of priority and purpose rearranging themselves around this small person who shared his genes and his stubborn chin and his tendency to stare with unblinking intensity. "Hello, David," Marcus whispered, and the baby responded with a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been gas, but felt like the most important conversation of Marcus's life. "He usually cries when strangers hold him," Sarah said softly. And Marcus caught the wonder in her voice, the same amazement he was feeling at this instant connection between father and son. "I'm not a stranger," Marcus replied, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "I'm his father." And for the first time since boarding the plane, that title felt like more than biology. It felt like responsibility and privilege and the kind of love he'd never experienced before, immediate and overwhelming and terrifying in its completeness. Sarah was watching. Them with an expression Marcus couldn't read, pain and hope and fear all mixed together, in a way that reminded him why he'd fallen in love with her in the first place. She'd never been simple or easy or predictable, and her heart was large enough to hold complicated emotions without forcing them into neat categories. "My flight to Seattle leaves in 2 hours," she said quietly. "Seattle?" Marcus looked up from David's face, surprised. "You're moving to Seattle?" "I moved to Seattle 4 months ago. I got a job curating for a small gallery there. The cost of living is better for a single mother, and I have some friends from college who live nearby." Seattle, 3 time zones away from Chicago, from Marcus's life and business and everything familiar. If he let them walk away now, if he retreated into the safety of his controlled existence, David would grow up as a stranger on the other side of the country. His son would learn to walk and talk and read without Marcus there to witness any of it. "Don't go," Marcus said, the words slipping out before his business training could edit them into something more strategic. "Please, don't take him away from me before I've even had a chance to know him." "Marcus," Sarah's voice carried warning and exhaustion in equal measure. "I know I have no right to ask," Marcus continued, David's weight in his arms giving him a courage he'd never needed in boardrooms or negotiations. "I know I missed everything important, and I know you have every reason not to trust me, but he's my son, Sarah. He's our son. Doesn't that mean something?" "It means everything," Sarah whispered, tears finally spilling over despite her best efforts. "That's why I'm scared. That's why I moved across the country and changed my name back and tried to build a life where you couldn't hurt us." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, but he forced himself to absorb them, to understand what his choices had cost not just him, but the people he'd claimed to love. "I hurt you," he said, not a question but an acknowledgement of truth he'd been avoiding for 2 years. "You broke my heart," Sarah said simply, "and I can live with that. I've learned to live with that. But I won't let you break his." David chose that moment to grab Marcus's tie, tiny fingers wrapping around the silk with surprising strength. The gesture was so unexpectedly normal, so perfectly baby-like, that Marcus found himself laughing despite the gravity of their conversation. "He's got a good grip," Marcus said, gently extricating his tie from David's grasp. "He gets that from you," Sarah replied, and for just a moment, her smile was genuine, unguarded, the same smile that had made Marcus believe in possibilities beyond profit margins and market share. "Sarah, I want to be his father," Marcus said, meeting her eyes over David's head. "Not just biologically, not just financially, but really be his father. I want to know his favorite foods and help him learn to walk and read him bedtime stories and worry about him dating when he's 16. I want all of it, even the scary parts, especially the scary parts." "That sounds good, Marcus, but wanting isn't the same as doing. Being a parent isn't like running a company. You can't delegate the hard parts or take time off when it gets inconvenient. Children need consistency, reliability, someone who shows up even when, especially when it's difficult." Marcus looked down at David, who was now contentedly exploring the buttons on Marcus's suit jacket with the focused attention that seemed to run in the Wellington family. His son, this perfect little person who existed because of one night when love had temporarily triumphed over fear, when Sarah had convinced him that maybe they could be brave enough to build something beautiful together. "Teach me," Marcus said quietly. "What?" "Teach me how to be his father. I know I missed the beginning and I know I can't make up for that, but I can learn. I want to learn. Stay in Chicago at least for a while. Let me prove that I can put David first, that I can be the kind of father he deserves." Sarah was quiet for so long that Marcus began to fear she'd already made up her mind to walk away. Around them, the airport continued its busy rhythm, passengers arriving and departing, lives intersecting briefly before moving on to separate destinations. But in this small bubble of conversation, 3 lives hung in the balance of whatever Sarah decided next. "I can't afford to stay in Chicago long term," she said finally. "I gave up my apartment when I moved to Seattle. The job there pays better than anything I could find here, and I need the health benefits, the stability." "I'll help," Marcus said immediately. "Whatever you need, housing, healthcare, childcare, I'll make sure you have it." "I don't want your money, Marcus." "It's not about the money. It's about David. It's about giving him the chance to know both his parents, to have the family we talked about before everything fell apart." Sarah reached out and touched David's cheek with infinite tenderness, and Marcus saw the moment when maternal love overrode every other consideration. Whatever else had gone wrong between them, whatever trust had been broken and hearts damaged, David deserved the chance to know his father. "2 weeks," she said quietly. "What?" "I'll stay for 2 weeks. I'll call my job and ask for extended leave. I'll figure out temporary housing, and I'll give you 2 weeks to show me that you've really changed. 2 weeks to prove that you can put David's needs before your own ambitions." 2 weeks. 14 days to demonstrate that he'd learned to value the right things, to show that success meant more than profit margins and market dominance. 2 weeks to prove he could be the father David needed and the partner Sarah had once believed him capable of becoming. "Deal," Marcus said, extending his free hand to shake on it, then realizing how inappropriate the business gesture was in this context. Instead, he adjusted his hold on David, who seemed perfectly content in his father's arms. "There are conditions," Sarah continued. "You don't get to use David as a photo opportunity for business magazines. You don't get to show him off to clients or use him to soften your corporate image. If you're serious about being his father, then you're serious about protecting his privacy and his childhood." Marcus nodded, understanding that these weren't arbitrary demands, but the protective instincts of a mother who'd been raising a child alone, making every decision based on what was best for David, rather than what was convenient for adults. "And if after 2 weeks, I decide you're not ready for this responsibility, you respect that decision. You don't sue for custody or use your resources to make my life difficult. You let us go to Seattle and build our lives there." The condition felt like a knife through his chest, but Marcus forced himself to nod agreement. If he couldn't prove himself in 2 weeks, if he couldn't demonstrate that he'd learned to prioritize love over success, then Sarah was right to protect David from the disappointment of an unreliable father. "What about Seattle? Your job?" "I'll figure it out," Sarah said, and Marcus heard the exhaustion behind her. Determination. "I've gotten good at figuring things out." The admission hurt because it was true. Sarah had been figuring things out alone for 8 months, making decisions about their son without input or support from the man who should have been her partner in all of it. She'd handled pregnancy and birth and the overwhelming responsibility of new parenthood as a single mother, because Marcus had made it clear that their marriage wasn't strong enough to handle the complications of a family. "You won't be alone this time," Marcus said quietly. "Whatever happens between us, you won't have to figure everything out by yourself anymore." Sarah looked at him skeptically, and Marcus realized that words were worthless in the face of 8 months of abandonment. He would have to prove his commitment through actions, through showing up consistently, even when it was inconvenient, even when business demanded his attention elsewhere. David had fallen asleep in Marcus's arms, the trusting weight of his small body serving as both promise and responsibility. Looking down at his son's peaceful face, Marcus felt a shift in his understanding of what success actually meant. All the deals he'd closed, all the companies he'd built, all the wealth he'd accumulated, none of it compared to this moment holding his child, having the chance to be part of David's life. "Where are you staying?" Marcus asked. "I was going to figure that out when I got to baggage claim." Sarah admitted. "There are plenty of hotels downtown. Stay with me," Marcus said impulsively, then quickly clarified when he saw Sarah's expression. "I mean, stay at the penthouse. There's plenty of room, and it would be easier for David." more stable than a hotel. I can stay at my office or get another place temporarily. I don't think that's a good idea. Why not? It's practical. David would have a consistent environment, you'd have privacy and space, and I'd be close enough to help, but not intrusive. Marcus paused, studying Sarah's face. Unless you're worried about us being in the same space. I'm worried about a lot of things, Marcus. I'm worried about David getting attached to you and then being disappointed when you decide this is too complicated. I'm worried about falling back into old patterns that didn't work the first time. I'm worried about hoping for things that aren't realistic. Her honesty was devastating, because it was earned. Marcus had given her every reason to doubt his capacity for sustained commitment to anything other than business success. But holding David, feeling the solid reality of fatherhood, Marcus knew with absolute certainty that this was different. This mattered in a way that nothing else had ever mattered. The penthouse has that guest suite on the second floor, Marcus said. Completely separate entrance, your own kitchen, privacy whenever you need it. David would have room to play and you could set up any routine that works for him. No pressure, no expectations beyond letting me spend time with my son. Sarah was wavering. Marcus could see it in her expression. The practical benefits of staying at the penthouse versus the emotional complications of being in the space where their marriage had thrived and ultimately collapsed. 2 weeks, she said finally, and we established ground rules. This isn't about us getting back together, Marcus. This is about David. Everything we do has to be what's best for him. Understood, Marcus agreed, though part of him wondered if what was best for David might include his parents finding their way back to each other. But that was a hope for later, for after he'd proven he could be trusted with the smaller promises. They made their way toward baggage claim, Marcus still carrying David, who had awakened but seemed content to observe the airport bustle from his father's arms. Sarah walked beside them, close enough to take David if he became fussy, but allowing Marcus to maintain the connection that felt more precious than any asset he'd ever acquired. Tell me about him, Marcus said, as they rode the escalator down to baggage claim. What's he like? What does he enjoy? Sarah's face softened as she shifted into mother mode, the role that seemed to have become her primary identity over the past 8 months. He's curious about everything. He loves music, classical especially, but also jazz. He gets excited when he hears piano music, starts kicking and making happy sounds. Like you, Marcus observed. Sarah had been a classically trained pianist before focusing on art curation, and some of Marcus's favorite memories from their marriage involved Sunday mornings when she'd play while he read the financial reports, the music transforming their penthouse into something that felt like home rather than just an expensive address. He's also stubborn, Sarah continued with a slight smile. When he wants something, he's very determined about getting it. He'll keep trying different approaches until something works. Definitely gets that from both sides, Marcus said ruefully. What else? He's social. He loves being around people, gets fussy if he's alone too long. And he's smart, Marcus, really smart. He watches everything, remembers patterns, figures out cause and effect faster than most babies his age. Marcus felt a swell of parental pride that caught him, off guard with its intensity. His son was smart, social, determined, traits that could serve David well in life, though Marcus hoped his child would use them for better purposes than corporate conquest. Does he sleep through the night? Marcus asked, realizing how little he knew about the practical realities of caring for an infant. Sarah laughed, but there was exhaustion behind it. Sometimes. He's getting better, but he still wakes up around 2 a.m. most nights. Growth spurts seem to mess with his schedule. Marcus made a mental note to research infant sleep patterns, feeding schedules, developmental milestones, all the information he should have absorbed months ago when Sarah was pregnant and struggling with morning sickness, while he focused on quarterly projections. They reached baggage claim and Sarah pointed toward Carousel 3. That's our flight, though I don't have much luggage, just a carry-on and David's diaper bag. I wasn't planning on staying long. The casual mention of her original plans, a brief visit to Chicago before returning to her new life in Seattle, reminded Marcus how close he'd come to missing this entirely. If they'd been on different flights, if he'd been seated somewhere else on the plane, If David hadn't looked so unmistakably like a Wellington, they might have passed like strangers in the airport, his son growing up 3 time zones away without Marcus ever knowing he existed. "I need to call my assistant," Marcus said, pulling out his phone. "Cancel some meetings, reschedule the board presentation. This merger can wait." "Marcus," Sarah said quietly, "you don't have to reorganize your entire life immediately. David and I aren't going anywhere for 2 weeks." But Marcus was already scrolling through his contacts, his mind shifting into the organizational mode that had made him successful in business. The difference was that now he was organizing his life around what mattered most instead of what paid the most. "Jennifer, it's Marcus," he said when his assistant picked up. "I need you to clear my calendar for the next week, possibly 2. Reschedule everything that can be moved, delegate what you can to the department heads, and postpone anything that isn't absolutely critical." "Sir, is everything all right? You have the Morrison merger presentation scheduled for Thursday and the quarterly review with the board. The Morrison deal will survive a week's delay, and the board has waited 3 months for this review. They can wait another few days. This is a family emergency." Family emergency. Marcus had never used those words in relation to his business schedule before. Throughout their marriage, Sarah's art gallery openings had been networking opportunities. Their anniversary dinners had been relationship maintenance, and even their honeymoon had been abbreviated for a critical acquisition meeting. But now, looking at David in his arms, Marcus understood what constituted a real emergency. "Should I send the car to your usual location?" Jennifer asked, clearly confused by this departure from routine. "Send it to O'Hare, Terminal 3, baggage claim. And Jennifer, have housekeeping prepare the guest suite. I'll have company for a few weeks." Marcus ended the call and found Sarah watching him with an unreadable expression. "You really cancelled meetings for this?" she asked. "For David," Marcus corrected. "I'm cancelling. Meetings for my son." Something flickered in Sarah's eyes, surprise maybe, or the faint beginning of hope. But she quickly shuttered the emotion, reminding Marcus that trust would have to be rebuilt through consistency, not grand gestures. The baggage carousel started moving, and Sarah pointed to a small black suitcase. "That's mine." Marcus retrieved the bag with his free hand, struck by how little Sarah had brought for what was supposed to be a permanent relocation. During their marriage, she'd traveled with enough luggage for a small army, every outfit coordinated, every accessory carefully chosen. This single suitcase spoke of a different kind of life, practical, portable, ready to adapt to whatever circumstances required. "Is this everything?" Marcus asked. "Most of our things are in storage in Seattle. I shipped the important stuff ahead when I took the job. This was just meant to be a quick trip to Chicago to handle some paperwork from my old gallery." The word "our" hit Marcus like a physical blow. Our things meant Sarah and David's things, their life together that didn't include him, their shared possessions and routines and inside jokes that had developed over 8 months of single motherhood. Marcus was the outsider here, the stranger trying to find a place in an already established family unit. David had started fussing in Marcus's arms, making soft whimpering sounds that Sarah immediately recognized. "He's hungry," she said, reaching for the diaper bag. "I should feed him before we go anywhere." "There's a family restroom over there," Marcus said, pointing toward a sign near the exit. "More private than the main terminal." Sarah looked surprised by his awareness of airport family facilities, and Marcus realized she was adjusting her assumptions about how much he knew about traveling with children. The truth was, he'd noticed these things during business trips, but had never imagined he'd need the information personally. They made their way to the family restroom, a larger space designed for parents traveling with small children. Sarah settled into the single chair, while Marcus stood awkwardly by the door, unsure of his role in this intimate routine. "You can sit down," Sarah said softly, preparing a bottle from the supplies in her bag. "He's not performing for an audience. It's just eating." Marcus sat on the small bench, watching as Sarah tested the bottle temperature on her wrist, a gesture so naturally maternal it took his breath away. She'd learned all of this while he'd been learning about market fluctuations and competitor analysis. She'd developed instincts and expertise in the most important job in the world, while he'd been perfecting skills that suddenly seemed trivial by comparison. David latched onto the bottle immediately, his tiny hands coming up to help hold it, his eyes focused on Sarah's face with complete trust and contentment. The intimacy of the moment made Marcus feel like an intruder, but also desperately envious. This was what he'd missed, not just the big milestones, but the quiet, everyday moments that built the foundation of parent-child bonding. "Can I?" Marcus started, then stopped, unsure how to ask for what he wanted. "What? Can I feed him sometime? I mean, if that's something fathers do. I don't know the rules." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Of course fathers feed their children, Marcus. That's one of the basic requirements of parenting." "I know it sounds stupid," Marcus said, feeling heat rise in his cheeks. I don't know what I don't know. I've never been around babies much. My business associates aren't exactly the playdate crowd." "It's not stupid," Sarah said quietly. "It's honest. And David will need you to learn, so being willing to ask questions is actually a good sign." She was being generous, Marcus realized. More generous than he deserved, given how spectacularly he'd failed at being a partner when she needed one most. But perhaps that generosity was for David's benefit rather than his own, Sarah putting aside her own hurt to give their son the best possible chance at having a relationship with his father. "Tell me what I should know," Marcus said, "about his schedule, his preferences, what makes him happy or upset. I want to understand his world." Sarah was quiet for a moment, and Marcus could see her making calculations. How much to share? How quickly to trust him with the intimate details of David's daily life. "He usually eats every 3 to 4 hours, she said finally. "He likes the bottle warm, but not hot, and he needs to be burped halfway through and again at the end. He's not on solid foods yet, but the pediatrician says we can start introducing some basics next month." Marcus absorbed the information like he was studying for the most important test of his life. What else? "He naps twice a day, usually around 11 a.m. and 3 p.m., but the timing varies depending on how well he slept the night before. He likes to be swaddled when he sleeps, and he has this little stuffed elephant that helps him settle down." "An elephant?" Sarah smiled, the first completely unguarded expression Marcus had seen from her since the plane. "His name is Peanut. David's had him since he was about 2 months old. It was a gift from my friend Rachel in Seattle." Marcus felt a stab of jealousy toward this Rachel person who'd been there for David's early months, who'd known what kind of gift would become a beloved comfort object. But he pushed the emotion aside, focusing instead on building his understanding of his son's world. "What makes him laugh?" Marcus asked. "Peekaboo, obviously. He also thinks it's hilarious when you make funny voices while reading to him, and he loves it when you sing to him, even if you're completely off-key." "I can't sing," Marcus admitted. "Neither can I, really, but David doesn't seem to mind. He just likes the attention, the interaction." Sarah paused, studying Marcus's face. "You'll figure it out. Parenting isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up consistently and paying attention to what your child needs." David had finished his bottle and was making soft, satisfied sounds. Sarah lifted him to her shoulder, patting his back gently while he worked on the burp that would make him comfortable again. "Would you like to try?" she asked, and Marcus realized she was offering to let him handle the burping process. "What if I do it wrong?" "You can't really do it wrong. Just support his head and neck, pat or rub his back gently, and be patient. Sometimes it takes a few minutes." Sarah transferred David to Marcus's shoulder, positioning his hands correctly, showing him the gentle patting motion that would help release trapped air. David felt so small against Marcus's chest, trusting and vulnerable, in a way that made every protective instinct Marcus possessed surge to life. "Like this?" Marcus asked, carefully patting David's back. "Perfect. You're a natural." The compliment shouldn't have mattered so much, but Marcus found himself holding on to it like a lifeline. A natural. Maybe he could learn to be good at this. Maybe he could develop the instincts that seemed to come so easily to Sarah. David produced a small burp that seemed disproportionately satisfying to accomplish, and Marcus felt ridiculously proud of this minor achievement. He did it. Sarah laughed, a real laugh, spontaneous and warm. "Yes, he did. Congratulations, you've successfully burped your first baby. First of many, I hope," Marcus said, the words coming out more seriously than he'd intended. Sarah's smile faded slightly, reminding both of them that this was still a trial period, that Marcus's presence in David's life wasn't guaranteed beyond the next 2 weeks. "We should go," Sarah said, gathering her things. "David will want another nap soon, and I should get settled wherever I'm staying." Marcus stood, still holding David, reluctant to break the physical connection that felt like the most important bond he'd ever formed. "The penthouse is only 20 minutes from here. You'll have your own space, complete privacy, whatever you need to make this work for David." They made their way out of the airport, Marcus carrying the luggage while Sarah managed the diaper. Pagan kept an eye on David, who was alert but content in his father's arms. The November afternoon was crisp, typical Chicago weather that Marcus had always found invigorating, but now seemed harsh for a baby who'd been living in Seattle's milder climate. "Is he warm enough?" Marcus asked, suddenly worried about temperature regulation and infant health concerns he'd never considered before. "He's fine," Sarah assured him, but she pulled a small blanket from the diaper bag and tucked it around David. "Though we'll need to get him some warmer clothes if we're staying through winter weather." The casual mention of "we" staying gave Marcus hope that Sarah was at least considering the possibility of extending their time in Chicago beyond the initial 2 weeks. But he forced himself not to read too much into the comment. Sarah was just being practical, thinking through the logistics of temporarily relocating with an infant. Marcus's driver was waiting at the curb with the familiar black sedan that had transported him to countless business meetings and airport runs. But today, looking at the pristine interior, Marcus realized the car was completely inappropriate for traveling with a baby. "Does David have a car seat?" Marcus asked, suddenly aware of safety regulations he'd never needed to consider. "In the trunk of my rental car in Seattle," Sarah said, then saw Marcus's expression. "We can pick one up on the way to your place. There's a baby store, not far from downtown." Marcus made a mental note to research infant car seats, to understand safety ratings and installation requirements and all the practical details that responsible parents mastered. His driver looked confused by the delay, but Marcus ignored him, his attention completely focused on Sarah and David. "Change of plans, Robert," Marcus said as his driver approached. "We need to make a stop for baby supplies before going home." "Baby supplies, sir?" Robert's professional composure slipped slightly, clearly wondering when his boss had acquired a child. "Car seat primarily, whatever else." Marcus looked at Sarah questioningly. "Just a car seat for now," Sarah said. "I have everything else David needs for a few days." They drove through Chicago's afternoon traffic, David sleeping peacefully in Sarah's arms, while Marcus watched the city pass outside the windows. He'd made this drive thousands of times, but now he was seeing it differently, noticing parks where David might play someday, family restaurants instead of business lunch spots, the entire urban landscape reconfigured around the needs and interests of a small child. The baby store was overwhelming in its complexity. Aisles of products Marcus had never known existed, safety features and convenience options, and developmental considerations that seemed to require advanced degrees to understand. Sarah moved through the space with confident efficiency, clearly having researched these decisions months ago. "This one," she said, indicating a car seat that looked like it could launch into space. "It has the highest safety ratings and it converts as he grows, so you won't need to replace it for several years." Several years. Sarah was planning for Marcus to be part of David's life for years, not just the trial period of 2 weeks. Or maybe she was just being practical, choosing equipment that would serve David well, regardless of how much time he spent with his father. Marcus purchased the car seat without looking at the price, along with a base that would stay permanently installed in his car, and several other items Sarah mentioned David would need if he was spending regular time in Marcus's custody. Custody. The word felt both foreign and natural, implying legal arrangements and shared responsibility, and all the complicated logistics of co-parenting. "You'll need to have this professionally installed," Sarah said, as they loaded the car seat into the trunk. "The fire department does it for free, or there are certified technicians at most baby stores." "I'll have it done tomorrow," Marcus promised, adding another item to his rapidly growing list of parental responsibilities. The drive to Marcus's penthouse took them through downtown Chicago. past the office building where Marcus had spent countless late nights building his empire. The building looked different now, less like the center of his universe and more like one building among many, important but not all-consuming. "You kept the penthouse," Sarah observed, as they pulled into the underground garage of the luxury high-rise. "I didn't know what else to do with it," Marcus admitted. "It felt like home when we lived there together. After you left, it just felt like an expensive hotel room." Sarah was quiet, perhaps remembering the good times they'd shared in the space before everything fell apart. The penthouse had been their first major purchase as a married couple, the place where they'd planned to build their life together, to eventually raise the children they'd talked about in hypothetical terms. The elevator ride to the top floor felt endless, David stirring slightly in Sarah's arms but remaining asleep. Marcus found himself nervous about Sarah's reaction to the penthouse, wondering if being back in their former home would be too emotionally difficult, or if enough time had passed to make the space feel neutral. "I had housekeeping prepare the guest suite," Marcus said as they reached his floor. "But if you'd rather stay somewhere else—" "This is fine," Sarah interrupted. "It's actually probably better for David to have consistent space rather than switching hotels." Marcus unlocked the door to the penthouse, and they stepped into the expansive living area with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. The space was exactly as Sarah remembered it: elegant, expensive, and somehow cold, despite the designer furniture and carefully curated art collection. "Nothing's changed," she said quietly. "I couldn't figure out how to make it feel right without you here," Marcus admitted. "So I just left everything the same." Sarah walked to the windows, bouncing David gently when he began to fuss at the change of environment. The afternoon light streaming through the glass illuminated both mother and child, and Marcus was struck by how perfectly they fit in this space that had never quite felt like home after Sarah left. "The guest suite is upstairs," Marcus said. "Completely separate entrance if you want privacy, but connected to the main house if you need anything." They climbed the stairs to the second floor, Marcus carrying Sarah's suitcase while she managed David and the diaper bag. The guest suite had been designed as a self-contained apartment for visiting business associates or family members, though Marcus had never actually had overnight guests who weren't related to work. "This is perfect," Sarah said, looking around the space: bedroom, sitting area, kitchenette, and private bathroom with a deep soaking tub. "David can sleep in the bedroom with me, and there's room for him to play during the day. I can have a crib delivered tomorrow," Marcus offered, "and whatever else he needs: high chair, changing table, toys." "Marcus, you don't need to buy out every baby store in Chicago. David is portable right now. We can make this work with minimal equipment." But Marcus was already mentally cataloging everything his son might need, every comfort or convenience that would make David's temporary stay in the penthouse as pleasant as possible. It was the same organizational instinct that had made him successful in business, but now applied to the infinitely more important task of creating a welcoming environment for his child. David had awakened fully and was looking around the new space with curious eyes, taking in the unfamiliar sights and sounds. He seemed alert but not distressed, adaptable in the way that young children often were. "Can I hold him while you get settled?" Marcus asked. Sarah hesitated for just a moment, then transferred David to Marcus's arms. "I'll just unpack a few things. He might get hungry again in an hour or so." Marcus settled into the comfortable armchair by the window, David content to sit on his lap and explore the buttons on Marcus's shirt. The simple interaction felt like a revelation. His son calm and happy in his arms, trusting him despite being in an unfamiliar place with a man who was essentially a stranger. "What do you think, David?" Marcus asked softly. "Is this okay? Can we figure out how to be father and son?" David responded by grabbing Marcus's finger with surprising strength, holding on as if anchoring himself to this new relationship. The gesture was so trusting, so naturally affectionate, that Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. Through the bedroom doorway, Marcus could see Sarah unpacking her single suitcase with efficient movements. She'd traveled light, not just because it was supposed to be a brief trip, but because her life had been streamlined by necessity. Single motherhood had taught her to prioritize, to focus on essentials rather than conveniences. "Sarah," Marcus called softly, not wanting to wake David if he was drifting towards sleep. "Yes? Thank you for staying, for giving me this chance." Sarah appeared in the doorway, and Marcus saw the careful neutrality she was maintaining. "Don't thank me yet, Marcus. This is just the beginning. The real test comes when David has a fever at 3 a.m., or when you have to choose between a business emergency and his needs, or when the novelty wears off and it's just the daily routine of parenting." "I know," Marcus said, though he suspected he had no idea what he was promising. "But I want to learn. I want to be the father David deserves, even if I'm starting later than I should have." "We all start from wherever we are," Sarah said quietly. "The question is whether you'll stay committed when it gets difficult." David was growing heavy in Marcus's arms, his head drooping toward sleep. Marcus adjusted his position carefully, not wanting to disturb his son's comfort, marveling at how naturally the protective instincts seemed to emerge. "He trusts you," Sarah observed, watching them from the doorway. "Does that surprise you?" "A little. He's usually more cautious with new people. But then again, you're not really new people, are you? You're his father." The word father still felt both foreign and absolutely right, like a title Marcus was growing into rather than one he'd earned. But looking down at David's peaceful face, seeing his own features reflected in miniature perfection, Marcus understood that biology was just the starting point. Real fatherhood would be built through presence, through consistency, through all the small daily acts of love that Sarah had been performing alone for 8 months. "I should let you both rest," Marcus said quietly. "It's been a long day. What about you? Don't you have work to catch up on?" Marcus considered the emails probably flooding his inbox, the deals waiting for his attention, the board presentation that had been postponed. All of it felt distant and unimportant compared to the weight of his sleeping son in his arms. "Work can wait," he said. "This is more important." Sarah studied his face as if trying to determine whether he really meant it, or if this was just the temporary enthusiasm of novelty. Marcus didn't blame her for the skepticism. He'd given her every reason to doubt his ability to sustain commitment to anything other than business success. "I'll be downstairs if you need anything," Marcus said, carefully transferring David to Sarah's arms. "Food, baby supplies, anything at all?" "Thank you," Sarah said, and for a moment the gratitude seemed genuine rather than polite. Marcus made his way back to the main floor of the penthouse, the space feeling both familiar and completely transformed by the presence of Sarah and David upstairs. He'd lived here alone for 2 years, rattling around in elegant rooms that had once been filled with laughter and conversation and the comfortable rhythm of shared domestic life. Now, knowing his family was sleeping 1 floor above him, the penthouse felt like it might become home again. Marcus settled into his study, opening his laptop with every intention of catching up on the work he'd abandoned for the day. But instead of reviewing contracts or analyzing market reports, he found himself researching infant development, child psychology, and co-parenting strategies for divorced couples. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. "Board asking about Thursday's presentation. Should I reschedule for next week?" Marcus stared at the message, remembering how just 12 hours ago, that presentation had been the most important thing on his calendar. The Morrison merger, his latest acquisition target, worth hundreds of millions and months of negotiation. "Reschedule for next month," he typed back. "Family emergency ongoing." Another buzz. "Sir, next month, the Morrison deadline will be extended or they'll find another buyer," Marcus replied. "Some things are more important than deals." He turned off his phone before Jennifer could respond, with more questions about his sudden shift in priorities. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus Wellington was putting family first, and if that meant missing opportunities or disappointing business associates, so be it. David was his son. That fact trumped every other consideration. Marcus spent the evening reading everything he could find about 8-month-old developmental milestones, sleep training methods, and the emotional needs of children whose parents weren't together. He learned about object permanence and stranger anxiety, and the importance of consistent routines. He researched the best pediatricians in Chicago and made notes about child-proofing his penthouse. Around 10 p.m., he heard soft footsteps on the stairs, and looked up to see Sarah entering the kitchen area, David's monitor in her hand. "Can't sleep?" Marcus asked. "He's down for the night, hopefully until around 2 a.m. I thought I'd make some tea if that's okay." "Of course, whatever you need." Marcus gestured toward the kitchen. "Everything should be where you remember it." Sarah moved around the space with familiar efficiency, finding the chamomile tea she'd always preferred. Heating water in the kettle Marcus had bought specifically because she'd mentioned preferring it to the microwave method. The simple domesticity of the moment felt both natural and surreal. His ex-wife making tea in their former kitchen while their son slept upstairs. "How are you feeling about all this?" Marcus asked, closing his laptop and giving her his full attention. "Terrified," Sarah said honestly, settling onto the bar stool across from him with her steaming mug. "Hopeful, confused, exhausted." She paused, studying his face. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been given a chance I don't deserve but refuse to waste," Marcus replied. "Like everything I thought I knew about success and priorities was completely wrong. Like I want to be the kind of father David can be proud of, but I have no idea how to get there from here." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "The fact that you're asking those questions is a good start. The Marcus I was married to would have approached this like a business problem to be solved with resources and strategy. Isn't it, though? At least partially. I mean, David needs stability, security, resources to thrive. Those are things I can provide. He needs those things, yes, but more than that, he needs presence. He needs someone who will prioritize his emotional needs over their own convenience. He needs a father who will show up for school plays and soccer games and homework help, not just for the big milestones, but for all the ordinary Tuesday afternoons that actually make up childhood." Marcus absorbed this, understanding that Sarah was describing a version of fatherhood he'd never witnessed in his own childhood. His father had been successful, respected, financially generous, and almost completely absent from Marcus's day-to-day life. Business trips, long hours, weekend work sessions had been the norm, with quality time relegated to scheduled activities that felt more like appointments than relationships. "I don't want to be my father," Marcus said quietly. "Then don't be," Sarah replied simply. "You get to choose what kind of parent you become." They sat in comfortable silence, drinking tea and listening to the sounds of the city 40 floors below. It felt like the first honest conversation they'd had since before their marriage started falling apart, both of them too tired and emotionally drained for the defensive posturing that had characterized their final months together. "I'm scared too," Marcus admitted. "What if I mess this up? What if I'm not capable of being the father David needs? What if I hurt him the way I hurt you?" Sarah looked at him over the rim of her mug, and Marcus saw something shift in her expression. "The fact that you're worried about hurting him means you probably won't. The people who cause the most damage are usually the ones who don't think about the impact of their actions." "I thought about the impact of my actions during our marriage," Marcus said. "I thought I was building security for our future, providing for the family we talked about having. But I was so focused on the financial foundation that I forgot about the emotional foundation." "I know you thought you were doing the right thing," Sarah said softly. "That's what made it so hard. If you'd been selfish or lazy or obviously wrong, I could have been angry. But you were working toward goals I supported, just not in a way that left room for us to actually be married." The admission hung between them, years of hurt and misunderstanding finally being acknowledged directly. Marcus felt the urge to defend his choices, to explain the pressure he'd felt to succeed, to justify the long hours and missed dinners and delayed conversations about starting a family. But what was the point? The results spoke for themselves. A failed marriage, a son he'd never known existed, two people who'd loved each other but hadn't known how to build a life together. "I'm not the same person I was then," Marcus said finally. "Aren't you? What's different?" The question challenged him to articulate what he'd felt, but hadn't quite put into words. What was different? What had changed in the years since their divorce that would make him a better partner now, a better father to David? "My priorities," Marcus said slowly. "Before, I thought success meant building something that would last, creating financial security that could weather any storm. But success without people to share it with is just expensive loneliness. I've spent 2 years being successful and miserable, proving to myself that All the things I thought mattered don't actually matter at all. And you think that's changed permanently? Or is this just the novelty of discovering you have a son? Marcus considered the question seriously, examining his own motivations and capacity for sustained change. I don't know, he said honestly. I hope it's permanent. I want it to be permanent. But I understand why you'd need to see proof rather than just taking my word for it. Sarah nodded, and Marcus appreciated that. She didn't offer false reassurances or premature forgiveness. She was protecting David, protecting herself, maintaining appropriate boundaries while still giving Marcus the chance to prove he'd learned to value the right things. 2 weeks, she said, echoing the timeline they'd agreed on at the airport. 2 weeks, Marcus confirmed, and then we figure out what comes next, based on how well I've shown up for David. For both of us, Sarah corrected quietly. David needs his father, but he also needs his parents to be able to communicate effectively, to co-parent without drama or resentment. If we can't figure out how to be in each other's lives constructively, then shared custody becomes harmful rather than helpful. The observation was uncomfortably accurate. Marcus had been so focused on establishing a relationship with David that he hadn't fully considered the complexity of rebuilding trust with Sarah, of learning to interact as co-parents rather than as a divorced couple carrying years of hurt and disappointment. Can we do that? Marcus asked. Can we figure out how to put David's needs first, even when our own feelings complicate things? I don't know, Sarah said, but I'm willing to try, for his sake. A soft cry drifted down from the baby monitor, and Sarah immediately stood, her maternal instincts overriding everything else. He's probably just shifting positions, but I should check on him. Can I come with you? Marcus asked, impulsively. Sarah paused, clearly weighing whether to include him in this most intimate parental duty. He might not settle down as easily with 2 people there. Then I'll just watch. I want to learn how you handle the nighttime routine. Sarah nodded, and they made their way upstairs together, moving quietly through the guest suite toward the bedroom, where David's soft cries were becoming more insistent. Sarah approached the portable crib she'd set up next to the bed, her movements calm and efficient, despite being awakened from the edge of sleep. Hey, sweet boy, she whispered, reaching down to check David's diaper and adjust his position. What's the matter? Are you hungry again? David's cries softened at the sound of his mother's voice, but he remained fussy, his tiny fists waving in the air with infant frustration. Sarah picked him up, automatically checking all the usual suspects: diaper, hunger, temperature, comfort. He's not wet, and it's too soon for another feeding, she murmured, more to herself than to Marcus. Maybe gas pains, or just readjustment to the new environment. She began the gentle bouncing motion that seemed universal to parents everywhere, combined with soft shushing sounds and whispered reassurances. Marcus watched from the doorway, mesmerized by the intuitive nature of her responses, the way she cycled through different comfort techniques until she found what David needed. Sometimes it just takes time, Sarah explained quietly. Babies don't always have specific problems to solve. Sometimes they just need to know someone's there. The simple statement hit Marcus with unexpected force. Sometimes they just need to know someone's there. How many times in his adult life had he needed exactly that? Not solutions or strategies or resources, just the reassurance of another person's presence. How many times had he failed to provide that basic comfort to the people who mattered most? David was settling down, his cries giving way to soft hiccups and eventually to the steady breathing of returning sleep. Sarah continued the gentle rocking motion for several more minutes, ensuring he was fully settled before attempting to put him back down. Would you like to try? She whispered to Marcus. Marcus approached carefully, accepting David's warm weight as Sarah transferred him over. The baby stirred slightly but didn't wake, trusting in the way that children trusted, without calculation or reservation. Marcus found himself matching Sarah's gentle swaying motion, something that seemed to come naturally despite his lack of experience. Just like that, Sarah whispered approvingly. You're getting the hang of it. For several more minutes they stood together in the darkened room, taking turns holding David, learning the rhythm of late-night parenting. It felt like the most natural thing in the world, and simultaneously like the most terrifying responsibility Marcus had ever undertaken. When David was finally settled back in his crib, sleeping peacefully, Marcus followed Sarah back to the sitting area of the guest suite. "How do you do that every night?" he asked. "Wake up instantly. Know exactly what to try. Stay calm even when you must be exhausted." "Practice," Sarah said simply, "and necessity. When you're the only parent available, you learn to function regardless of how tired you are." The reminder of 8 months of solo parenting hit Marcus like a physical blow. Sarah had handled every night feeding, every diaper change, every bout of fussiness without backup or support. She'd learned to read David's needs through trial and error, developed expertise through necessity, built an unbreakable bond through consistent presence. "I'm sorry," Marcus said quietly, "for leaving you to handle all of this alone, for not being there when you needed me most. We've both made choices, Marcus. I chose not to. Tell you I was pregnant. I chose to handle the pregnancy and birth alone rather than risk another rejection. Those were my decisions, and I have to live with the consequences. But you made those choices because of how I behaved during our marriage, because I'd made it clear that children would be an inconvenience to my career plans." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus could see her working through complex emotions: forgiveness and resentment, hope and caution, love for their son and uncertainty about their future. "We can't change the past," she said finally. "We can only decide how to move forward from here. David deserves parents who focus on his needs rather than relitigating old hurts." "You're right," Marcus agreed. "But I need you to know that I understand what I missed, what my choices cost all of us. And I need you to know that I'm committed to being better." Sarah nodded, exhaustion finally showing in her posture. "We should both get some sleep. Tomorrow will be a full day." Marcus wanted to stay, to continue this conversation that felt like the first real communication they'd had in years. But Sarah was right. They both needed rest, and David would likely be awake again in a few hours for another feeding. "Good night, Sarah," Marcus said softly. "Good night." Marcus made his way back downstairs, but sleep proved elusive. He found himself listening for sounds from the baby monitor he'd asked Sarah to leave on the kitchen counter, not because he expected to help with nighttime feedings yet, but because he wanted to learn the rhythms of his son's sleep patterns. Around 2:30 a.m., David's cries drifted through the monitor, and Marcus heard Sarah's immediate response, her soothing voice, the sounds of another feeding and diaper change handled with practiced efficiency. He lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, marveling at the dedication required for solo parenting, the way Sarah had learned to function on interrupted sleep and constant vigilance. The next morning, Marcus woke early and prepared coffee, wanting to have something ready when Sarah came downstairs with David. He'd also researched pediatrician offices during his insomnia, making a list of highly rated practices that could see David for a routine checkup. Sarah appeared around 7 a.m., David alert and content in her arms, both of them looking more rested than Marcus felt despite his uninterrupted night of sleep. "Good morning," she said, accepting the coffee Marcus offered with genuine gratitude. "How did you sleep?" "Like a new parent," Marcus replied, then realized the presumption in his words. I kept listening to the monitor, wondering if I should help somehow." Sarah smiled, the first completely unguarded smile he'd seen since the airport. "That's very sweet, and very normal for new fathers. The protective instincts kick in pretty quickly." Marcus felt a warm flush of pride at being called a new father, even though the title felt both earned and completely undeserved. "What's David's morning routine usually like?" "Breakfast, playtime, then his first nap around 11. The timing varies depending on how the night went, but he's pretty consistent about needing 2 naps a day." "Can I help with breakfast?" Marcus asked, then immediately felt foolish. Can I watch? Learn how to do it?" "Marcus, you don't have to ask permission to participate in taking care of your son. Yes, you can help with breakfast, but fair warning, it's messier than you might expect." Sarah was right. Feeding an 8-month-old involved more food on the high chair, floor, and baby than actually made it into David's mouth. But watching his son explore textures and flavors with delighted curiosity, seeing the joy on his face when he successfully managed to get a piece of banana to his mouth, Marcus understood that the mess was part of the experience, not a Problem to be solved. He likes bananas, Marcus observed, cleaning pureed fruit from David's chin. Bananas, sweet potatoes, anything orange or yellow? He's suspicious of green foods, but the pediatrician says that's normal for his age. The casual mention of pediatrician visits reminded Marcus of all the routine healthcare decisions Sarah had been making alone. When is his next appointment? I'd like to be there if that's okay. Sarah paused in her cleaning, clearly weighing the implications of including Marcus in medical decisions. Next week, actually. Thursday afternoon for his 9-month checkup and immunizations. I'll clear my schedule, Marcus said immediately. You don't have to. I want to, Marcus interrupted gently. I want to be involved in every aspect of his care, from the routine stuff to the important decisions. I want to be a real partner in this. The word partner hung between them, carrying implications beyond co-parenting. But Sarah didn't address the larger meaning, focusing instead on the immediate logistics. Dr. Martinez is very good, she said. She's been seeing David since he was born, and she's great with nervous new parents. New parents, plural. Sarah was including him in that category, acknowledging his role even if she remained cautious about trusting his commitment. The days that followed established a routine that began to feel natural despite its newness. Marcus rearranged his schedule to be present for David's meals, naps, and playtime. He learned to read the subtle signs that indicated hunger, tiredness, or the need for a diaper change. He mastered the art of entertaining an 8-month-old, discovering that David found his business voice hilarious when used to narrate peekaboo games. More importantly, Marcus learned to be present without trying to optimize or improve everything. David didn't need his father to turn playtime into developmental exercises or feeding time into efficiency studies. He just needed consistency, attention, and the security of knowing his father was there. The breakthrough came on Thursday afternoon during David's pediatrician appointment. Dr. Martinez was a warm, competent woman in her 50s who immediately put both parents at ease. "So this must be Dad," she said, extending her hand to Marcus. "Sarah mentioned you'd be joining us today." Marcus felt a surge of pride at being identified as David's father, at being included naturally in the medical discussion. Dr. Martinez conducted a thorough examination, checking David's growth, development, and overall health while explaining everything to both parents. "He's thriving," she announced. "Perfect weight gain, excellent muscle tone, and his cognitive development is right on track. You're doing a wonderful job." The praise was directed at both of them, and Marcus realized that Dr. Martinez saw them as a parenting team, equal partners in David's care despite Marcus's late entry into the picture. "Any concerns or questions?" Dr. Martinez asked. "Sleep schedule," Sarah said immediately. "He's been waking more frequently since we moved temporarily. Is that normal?" "Very normal. Babies David's age are sensitive to environmental changes. The fact that he's adjusting well otherwise suggests he feels secure with both of you. The sleep will regulate as he gets used to the new routine." Marcus found himself asking questions about David's development, about milestones to watch for, about ways to support his son's growth. Dr. Martinez answered everything patiently, clearly pleased to see an engaged father taking active interest in his child's well-being. "One more thing," Dr. Martinez said as they prepared to leave. "David's going to need consistency as he grows. Whatever custody arrangement you work out, try to maintain similar routines in both homes. Children thrive on predictability. Similar routines in both homes." The assumption that Marcus would be a permanent part of David's life, that shared custody was a given rather than a possibility, made something settle in Marcus's chest that he hadn't realized was still twisted with anxiety. As they left the medical building, David content in his stroller, Sarah turned to Marcus with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You were good in there," she said, asking the right questions, paying attention to the answers. "David's lucky to have a father who cares about the details." "I'm lucky to have him," Marcus replied, "to have both of you giving me this chance." They walked in comfortable silence for a few blocks, David observing the city bustle with alert interest. The November afternoon was crisp but sunny, perfect weather for introducing a baby to the rhythms of urban life. "Marcus," Sarah said finally, "I need to tell you something." Marcus felt his stomach drop, preparing for bad news, for the announcement that 2 weeks hadn't been enough to prove his commitment. "I called my boss in Seattle this morning," Sarah continued. "I requested an extension of my leave, possibly permanent depending on how things develop here." Marcus stopped walking, turning to face her completely. "What does that mean?" "It means I think David needs his father in his life. It means I can see that you're serious about this, that you're willing to prioritize being a parent over everything else. It means maybe we can figure out how to be a family, even if it's not the same kind of family we tried to be before." The words hit Marcus like sunrise after the longest night of his life. Sarah was staying. She was giving them a real chance to build something sustainable, something that put David's needs at the center while acknowledging that both parents had changed and grown since their divorce. "Are you sure?" Marcus asked. "What about your job, your life in Seattle? Chicago is David's home too." Sarah said simply, "And maybe it's time for me to stop running from the possibility that some things are worth fighting for." Marcus wanted to kiss her, to sweep her into his arms and promise her everything he'd failed to deliver the first time. But they weren't there yet, might never be there again, and that was okay. What mattered was David and the chance to give their son the stability of 2 parents who were committed to making co-parenting work. "There are conditions," Sarah continued, and Marcus heard the echo of their airport conversation. "Name them. We do this slowly. We figure out custody arrangements that work for everyone. We establish clear boundaries about what this means for us personally versus what it means for David. And we both commit to putting his needs first, even when it's inconvenient or emotionally complicated." "Agreed," Marcus said without hesitation. "Whatever David needs." "And Marcus, if this doesn't work, if you decide parenting is too demanding, or if we can't figure out how to communicate effectively, we handle it like adults. No lawyers, no custody battles, no using David as a weapon against each other." Marcus understood that Sarah was protecting herself and David from the possibility that his commitment might waver, that the novelty of fatherhood might wear off when faced with the grinding daily reality of child-rearing. "It will work," Marcus said with quiet certainty. "I'm not the same man who let you walk away 2 years ago. I understand what matters now." Sarah studied his face, searching for the sincerity she needed to see. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly. "Okay," she said, "let's figure out how to be a family." They continued walking, David babbling contentedly as he watched pigeons scatter ahead of his stroller. To any observer, they looked like what they were trying to become, a family navigating the ordinary moments that make up a life together. Marcus pulled out his phone and composed a text to his assistant. "Cancel all weekend meetings. Family commitments take priority. This is the new normal." Then he turned off his phone and focused on the 2 people who had just transformed his understanding of success from something he achieved alone to something they could build together. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the kitchen of their new house, not the penthouse, but a family-friendly home in Lincoln Park with a yard for David to explore and bedrooms designed around the needs of a growing child rather than the image of success. David was taking his first wobbly steps between his parents, determined to master this new skill despite the inevitable tumbles. Each time he fell, he looked up with the Wellington stubbornness Marcus recognized from mirrors, pushing himself back to his feet with single-minded determination. "He gets that persistence from you," Sarah said, catching David as he toddled into her arms with a triumphant smile. "He gets the fearlessness from you," Marcus replied, watching his son immediately turn around to attempt the journey back across the kitchen. They'd been officially back together for 3 months, taking their relationship as slowly as they'd taken the custody arrangements. Dating while co-parenting had required new skills from both of them, learning to prioritize David's needs while also nurturing their own connection, building trust through consistency rather than grand gestures. Marcus had sold his company to a larger firm, staying on as a consultant, but no longer carrying the weight of being the sole decision-maker. The financial freedom allowed him to be present for David's daily routine while still maintaining the intellectual challenges that kept him engaged with the business world. Sarah had opened her own gallery, specializing in family portraits and child-friendly art installations. The space included a small play area where David could spend time while his mother worked, surrounded by creativity and beauty, and the knowledge that both his parents were building their careers around their shared priority of being present for him. "I have something to tell you," Marcus said as David successfully completed another crossing of the kitchen, clapping his hands in celebration of his achievement. "Good something or concerning something?" Sarah asked, the wariness that had characterized their early conversations now replaced by curiosity. "Good something, I hope." Marcus reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box that made Sarah's breath catch. "I know we're taking things slowly. I know we agreed to focus on being co-parents before we figured out what we might be to each other. But Sarah, I can't imagine my life without both of you in it. I can't imagine any future that doesn't include this, us, whatever we're building together." Sarah looked down at the box, then up at Marcus's face, searching for the certainty she needed to see. "Marcus, I'm not the man who married you 6 years ago," Marcus continued. "I'm not the man who prioritized business over family, who thought success meant accumulating things rather than nurturing relationships. I'm David's father, and I want to be your husband again, but only if you believe I've learned what really matters." David chose that moment to lose his balance, tumbling gently onto the padded playmat they'd spread across the kitchen floor. Instead of crying, he laughed, delighted by the unexpected change in perspective, immediately rolling over to attempt standing up again. "He's so resilient," Sarah said softly. Watching their son navigate the learning process with joy rather than frustration. "He learned that from his mother," Marcus said. "The woman who rebuilt her entire life around giving him the best possible start, who was brave enough to give his father a second chance, even when she had every reason not to trust him." Sarah opened the velvet box, revealing a ring that was nothing like the elaborate diamond she'd worn during their first marriage. This one was simpler, more personal. A vintage design with David's birthstone surrounded by smaller diamonds that caught the afternoon light streaming through their kitchen window. "It's not about replacing what we had before," Marcus said. "It's about building something new, something better, something that puts David and our family at the center of every decision we make." Sarah was crying now, but Marcus could see the joy behind the tears. "Are you sure, Marcus? Really sure? Because David and I have both gotten attached to this version of you, and we can't survive another disappointment." Marcus knelt down on the kitchen floor, next to where David was pulling himself up on the cabinet hardware, determined to master walking despite the occasional setbacks. "Sarah Chen," Marcus said, "formally, will you marry me again? Will you help me be the husband you deserve and the father David needs? Will you build a family with me that's based on presence instead of performance, on love instead of achievement?" Sarah looked down at Marcus, then at David, who was watching this adult drama with the serious attention he gave to all new experiences. Their son seemed to sense the importance of the moment, standing more steadily than he had all afternoon, as if providing his own blessing for whatever his parents decided. "Yes," Sarah said simply. "Yes to all of it." Marcus slipped the ring onto Sarah's finger, then stood to kiss her while David clapped his hands, not understanding the significance, but responding to the joy and excitement in his parents' voices. "When?" Sarah asked against Marcus's lips. "Whenever you want. Tomorrow, next month, next year. We have time to plan whatever kind of wedding will make you happy." "Small," Sarah said immediately. "Just us and David and the people who matter most. I don't need a big production. I just need us." Marcus understood. Their first wedding had been a social obligation, a networking opportunity disguised as a celebration of love. This time they wanted something authentic, intimate, focused on the commitment they were making rather than the impression they wanted to create. David had made his way over to his parents, pulling himself up on Marcus's leg and demanding attention through a series of cheerful babbles. Marcus lifted his son into his arms, and Sarah moved to stand beside them. The three of them reflected in the kitchen window, a family, imperfect and complicated, and absolutely right. "I love you," Marcus said to both of them. "I love this life we're building together." "I love you too," Sarah replied. "Both of you. All of us." David responded to the emotional intensity by grabbing both parents' faces in his small hands, pulling them closer together in what could have been coincidence but felt like blessing. His future was secure now, anchored in the love of two parents who had learned to put his needs first, who had found their way back to each other through the miracle of his existence. Outside, Chicago hummed with its usual energy, deals being made, fortunes won and lost, the relentless pursuit of success that had once defined Marcus's entire world. But inside their kitchen, success was measured in first steps and shared laughter, in the quiet satisfaction of choosing love over ambition, presence over performance. Marcus Wellington had finally learned what it meant to be truly wealthy, not in money or property or business achievements, but in the irreplaceable riches of family, second chances, and love that transcended every mistake he'd ever made. As the afternoon sun painted golden light across their kitchen floor, David took another determined step, his parents cheering his progress, the three of them building a future together, one small moment at a time. The flight that had changed everything was now just a memory, but the love it had rediscovered would last a lifetime. Marcus had found his way home at last, not to a place, but to the people who made anywhere feel like home. And for the first time in his life, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.